Well, good morning and welcome to this live edition of RED-C Roundup. I am your host for the day, Pam Marvin. And joining me today in studio is dear friend, long time, I don't know how long we've known each other, Heidi Dixon. So Heidi, welcome to the program today.
Thank you. I'm delighted.
Yeah, and this, a very special day, St. Joseph the Worker.
Yes.
Right? Worker, right, Caleb?
I think it's just a solemnity of St. Joseph.
The solemnity
Oh,
of
okay.
St.
Yeah.
Joseph. Okay. So, yes, we can ask for him to pray for us during the show. I have been so close to your work as you were a chaplain for my stepfather as he was passing. So I had a picture into your world and what you do and are about, which was beautiful. Then we had you speak last year at the Day of Reflection, in which a lot of your grief support system came out as
Yes.
well, all the people that you nourish with them. So today, my brothers and sisters, we're going to be talking a lot about grief and mourning and just the hope that there is behind that. And this is your local expert here. So I really wanted to tap into her expertise. But before we start getting any deeper, Heidi, just let's see, you and I, we met when Wyatt and Dottie, Wyatt was a baby, I suppose, and he's
Yeah.
16 now.
Yeah, Dottie and Brayton are the same age. So my oldest and your youngest. I think.
Yes.
So they're 20, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah. So
'cause
20 years, I would say.
I remember
Wow.
one of the kids, who was it? I think Mary came and babysat.
Yes, all the boys.
And
she babysat.
loved
Yeah.
Wyatt so much. Wyatt was her favorite
Yeah.
because he was little at the time.
Very lovable.
Wow. And okay, so catch us up with your journey, because it's been a really cool one for me to watch as your friend. What was the first thing you did? You chaplaincy, I believe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So my mom was in a car accident. Actually, tomorrow will be 31 years, marking the day that she became a quadriplegic. So that was really probably the beginning of my later development of becoming a chaplain, because I was kind of thrust into the medical and caregiving world when I was 16. She was 43. And so later, after I married and had kids, I got my bachelor's in psychology. I applied to marriage and family therapy school right away and was a second alternate. And one of my letters of reference wasn't submitted. So I didn't get in, right away. So, I rode horses for a living, which was the other thing I loved to do, and then got married and had kids. And when I was discerning, what life experience I had, which was caregiving, and I worked my way through college as an EMT for an ambulance service. So based on,
Is that how you met your husband?
No, that was much later.
Okay.
But so I had medical experience, then caregiving experience. I had a psychology degree, and it was time. It was time for Wyatt to go to kindergarten. So I'd stayed home for 9 years or something. And so I was just praying about how can and I had a growing love of the spiritual life. I was always spiritually sensitive, but, coming to learning about, it was Rainham Christie, and just starting to educate myself in the faith and reading some of Pope John Paul
going
II's.
deeper, taking next level is
Going
what I call
deeper,
it.
and then
Yeah.
I started, being formed, and then I started leading the women's groups and for Endow, and reading the lives of the saints. So my spiritual hunger was just really being really fed. And so my prayer was, I need money. I should have been working the whole time, but I stayed home, to raise the kids. And so I was like, what's the intersection between my lived experience in this medical realm and my growing love of the spiritual life? So I now can call it an inspiration because I know how it went from there. But the idea came that I should call the hospital and figure out, what do I need to do to end up at the bedside? And so I did that. And at the time, the spiritual care director of the hospital invited me to meet her for lunch. And I did. And she said, "Have you ever considered chaplaincy?" And I was like, "No. I mean, I'm pretty sure I can't do that. I'm a lay Catholic woman." And she said, "So am I." And, and so I was like, oh, so then that was a huge turning point, because she saw that I had the capacity to do the job then. And then I started pursuing the education to become a chaplain, which is called CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education. And so I was working as a chaplain not long after that, really at the hospital covering call. And then,
I remember when that was going on.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah. So fast forward, so it's been 10 years since I started that. That was 2014 that I became a chaplain at the hospital.
Mm.
And really have worked then more exclusively in hospice for the last 6 years or so. So I still work part-time as a chaplain for a care hospice. And then over the last, I've always loved having conversation at depth, and hospice gave me some of that opportunity, but I always craved more. And so I decided to go back and get my master's degree, which I just finished in December, and now
Congratulations.
got my license. So I'm LPC associate in January, and so I have a counseling practice through Hope Counseling Center at Christ Church, which is part of their Hope Ministries. So as a chaplain, I also started a grief support group for spouses, and it's called Until We Meet Again, and it's also through Christ Church under the umbrella of Mending Hearts.
So what year was it that you began that in the progression of things?
The grief group?
Yeah.
I think that...
Weren't you asked, if I remember rightly?
I was asked, yes, by Tommy Myrick, who was a pastor at Christ Church, but he was also a chaplain at the hospital, which is how I met him. And I asked if I could come and tour the grief center, or they were having an open house one day. And at the end of that little tour, he said, we could really use somebody to facilitate a group for spouses. And just being naive, I think, and, eager to help, I was like, yeah, I can probably do that. And so the very first meeting, we had one person come, and she said, where are all the grieving people? And I said, I don't know. She's like, we need to advertise. But the grieving people came. It's
not long
one,
after
and
that.
then 2, and then 4, and then, and now we meet every Monday at 11, and we're usually between 35 and 40 every week.
It's amazing. And do you like break up into small groups?
We
do you
don't.
have a
They're very
speaker?
resistant.
Okay.
We've tried because at one point, I think we were probably 15 maybe, and feeling like the group was too big. And so, and one of our members at that time, I said, Jean, I think the Lord is calling, and you should start a smaller group so people who want a small group experience can have that. But nobody in this group wants to change anything. And that continues to be the case. We've talked about closing the group, and they are adamant that it was available to them when they needed it. And so
tell me the format of the day when y'all meet.
Mondays at 11. So we kind of chat, like everybody kind of connects, because they really have built their own community.
Okay.
So first 10 minutes or so is social. Everybody kind of gets settled in. And then I usually ask them just kind of what's top of mind for them that day. Like, what have you come through that's been difficult? Is there something that's ahead of you that you want to talk about? Or is there something that's really good? Maybe it's a surprise, or, anytime when our pain and unexpected joy can coincide. This is so much of life, right? But as humans, we tend to be a little more black and white. So that's always a little confusing for us.
Yeah. Now I don't want to jump the gun a little bit, but I just really see how beautiful the end of life stuff with the hospice that you were doing, and the grief that's just like so contiguous in this great, wonderful, crazy life that is our Christian faith too. So I guess you don't necessarily have to be Christian to be in your group.
You don't.
Is it primarily focused on the Christian truths?
I would say that's in the background.
Okay.
We have some agnostic folks. We have somebody who's Jewish, mostly Christian, but the conversation always comes back to hope. So for a lot of people, most people in the room, the hope is that God has a plan for them, right? And for those who may not find their hope necessarily in God or their hope of heaven, they still retain the hope of seeing their loved one again. Okay. And so trying to pull all those pieces together, right? And there is so much kind of renegotiating. Who is God? This most terrible thing has happened to me. Who is God? Do I still want a relationship with that God?
Have I been abandoned?
Have I been abandoned? And so, we can navigate a lot of that together, which is really exciting.
Well, I think I kind of have a clue as to why your group has been so successful, but I'd like to hear your take on, that crescendo of growth and this sustainability, over time like that. So what do you attribute it to?
The short answer is love.
Okay.
Yeah. The members of my group will always give me too much credit, in my opinion, but I love them. I just say I open the door, and, but I'm really, because I am the only person in the room who has not lost my spouse. So it's very ironic that, they let me open the door for them and facilitate their conversation. But I think it's because I can be such a curious and compassionate learner. And I'm not the expert in the room, right? But I can make space for their experience. And I really want to know what it's like. And they really are my heroes, because this is not their first choice. And every day they show up to a life that isn't their first choice. And they do it with such generosity and courage. And so I am blessed by that continually, because they share, their love for their spouse, which is so powerful. And what we've learned over time is that you don't know how powerful and how deep your love is for your spouse or for anyone until you aren't able to show them anymore. And then the power wells, right? It's like something being dammed up. And so you can't even really know how much you love someone until you can't show them that you love them anymore. And
wow, I never thought about it that way. So let's just pause on that, because that's just a really beautiful part of grief that has never dawned on me. So our ability to express love for one another is kind of like this battery that keeps us all charged, and it's a using of ourselves in that beautiful way that God designed us, that Christ really, to serve one another like that. And so once that outlet then has been, let's say, unplugged and taken away, then it just all starts to build up inside and has no place to go.
And I would say plugged. The outlet has been plugged. So normally we have the outlet, you think about a fire hydrant, right? And you see the water running down the street, but you dam that thing up and the pressure builds and builds and builds. And it can be overwhelming. And then the regret can come, because you're like, I didn't even know I loved my person this much. And if I would have known, I would have tried to do it better.
Well, then tell me how to practically coach these beautiful people on how to, do you teach them to channel their love in other directions?
Yeah.
So tell me.
Yeah. So the love is what makes the world go round. And it's still, their love for their spouse is still changing the world. I am proof of that. Like, their love changes me, changes the way I love my husband and my kids. I think sometimes they wonder at the intensity that I come at things, because I'm like, time is short. Like, let's do it now.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, chill out.
You know, that reminds me of something that you've probably heard this before too, but in the supernatural, the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, there's only one that remains after we die.
That's right.
Which is love.
And it makes so much sense to me. But it's still, and I think this is something I've learned too, is that I thought, because we expect grief gets better over time, or it heals over time, which there's some truth to that. But that we think that the love will sort of shrink up or dry up and kind of blow away. And it doesn't, it grows because it's plugged up, right? You don't have your outlet. That power builds, and I see it. And so instead of going just to the one person that you're used to giving it to, it reminds me of Jesus and the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
Right? Jesus was, I dare say Jesus was confined, but right, he was
confined in his mortal body,
confined, limited by space and time,
sure,
right, as a man, and so, but when he died, right, he's like, I'm sending the advocate, right, the Holy Spirit, and so it's like that. It's like their love was going to this person, the depth of it, and now it's cast so broad, and so it touches so many more people, and so the power of the love just continues to change the world. And that's just so powerful.
Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and start getting into, oh gosh, there's so much I want to talk about, but let's go ahead and get into just the nuts and bolts about grieving. So say someone who's listening today is soon to be widowed, widower. They see it coming down the pike. What are some practical things you can tell them now to prepare for this upcoming loss?
Yeah. I think there's never actually any real being ready. You think you can, even if you've seen it a long time coming, but as long as you have that person in front of you, it's going to be impossible to imagine their absence really ahead of time. You can try, And some people really feel ready. And especially if your loved one is suffering, you can be even eager for their death. And that, people feel a lot guilty about that a lot, but really that is mercy. I mean, you don't want to see them
Yes.
suffer. It doesn't mean
Yes.
you want them to be dead, but you don't want to see them suffer. And that is a merciful thought, right? Or feeling.
Right. Well, mine also too is if they've been a person of great faith, and this is their good reward, is the way I see it as well.
Yeah. So you're eager for them to experience
The beatific vision.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is so much love there, but it can be compounded with guilt, especially if you're feeling your own limitations as a caregiver or as a person, and you're like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And so there can be a relief component for yourself because you're like, I'm not sure how much longer I can continue. And so people feel really guilty if there's any relief around death because they feel like I wished them, dead, which is not the
Not
case.
true.
It's not the case. We feel the limits of our own humanity, our body, our energy, our everything. And so I tell people, it's like, imagine someone pushing on you really hard and you're uncomfortable and then they let the pressure off. You would just naturally, or like you've had a wonderful day and you lay down to take a nap, or at the end of the day, it feels really good to lay down. It's not that you hated the day and didn't love the day, but your body needed rest.
Yeah.
And so that the relief that comes with laying down. So I
mhm.
like to compare those things because there's no shame in laying down when you're tired.
No. But,
So-
we talked about a little bit before we were on air too about, I was saying there are deaths that are out of order.
Yes.
I'm going to say a few prayers for a friend who lost his brother recently, and he lost his sister years ago. So the parents, he's really asking for prayers for his parents to have those kind of out of order deaths. I know some can be more painful than others. So can you
Yes.
talk on that for a
Sure.
second?
Sure. Yeah. So, and in my group, both sides are well represented, actually. So deaths were that were expected and deaths that seemed untimely or out of order. There was no aging involved, no decline involved. So no preparation whatsoever. And so that can complicate the grieving process because there was no preparation on the front side. There's so much shock involved. A lot of fears can come up because we have to face our own mortality then. If a young, healthy person, right, a wonderful person, and then you can invite this whole conversation around innocent suffering, right? Or again, we have to kind of say, who is God that this could happen? What does that mean for me? How do I live with this hole in my heart that it just hurts so much. I don't know how to think about it. I don't know how to talk about it. And then that can invite me to isolate myself because
Sure.
I'm hurting. And in our culture, we kind of learn very early. I'll do a quick side note. I helped with a kids' grief camp through Mending Hearts this summer, and we gave them little rubber ducks. And on the top of the duck, we said, can you say or write a word that's okay for the world to see about how you're feeling? And so it was like happy, smiling. And on the underside, we said, what's something that you would rather not people see about how you're feeling? And, like that would be hidden if the duck was in the water.
Mm-hmm.
And can you imagine what they wrote? Sadness, loneliness, anger, any negative emotion kids learn even before they can write. I need to hide these things. So for someone who's grieving a loss that's unexpected, the temptation to hide the pain, the confusion, the struggles around faith, the not being understood, and in our culture, we're not really good at death or grief. And so people will want to kind of rush you through your grief or have
Yes.
some expectation that,
So they
it's-
can be comfortable.
so they can be comfortable.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. And so where we want to rush someone to gratitude. Oh, I'm so glad you had 37 years with that person. And gratitude and pain can coexist, and they do. And so when we will only acknowledge the things that we're grateful for, the time that we had, we can really miss people in their pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very, very lonely.
Yeah. So, Heidi, one of the things that I really realized was the losses that I've experienced that was the most helpful. And maybe you have other little things like this too. So maybe it'll trigger something in you.
Sure.
And that was, I remember really fighting the grief, like what you were saying. Okay, I've got to be strong. I like that image of a strong mom who can take care of, a woman that's dignified. And this is just, there's the Christian side of me, like it's God's will. I need to love his will above all things. So I shouldn't be so downtrodden and things like that. That was my mind's eye, what I was thinking I should be like.
Right.
And what the Lord taught me in all that grief was, you can't go around the grief. You have to go through it.
Yeah.
And you have to allow yourself to feel it
Right.
and process it, which, and sometimes I think we're not ready. Sometimes even a year. I've heard for me too, like the second year is the hardest because you're finally letting yourself get over, I got to be strong. I got to be strong. I got to be strong. And then you're like, okay, I can grieve now.
Yes.
Is there anything else more like that?
Yes, very much so. So I have often heard, and from the people in my group too, that the second year is the hardest. Sort of the tasks are over, the shock has kind of worn off, the support has gone away, the finality. Like one of the ladies in my group said, I realized I kept waiting for someone to come and rescue me.
Mm.
And it wasn't until she could say, I realized no one is coming. It has to be me. That can happen in the second year, because in the first year, people are going to maybe try and rescue you a little bit or
alleviate your pain to the best they can.
But even after, one of the guys in my group was like, after 4 years, I still reach for her. And so to really accept they're not coming back, and if you try and compare the length of your relationship with the amount of time you're grieving, and we do hear 1 year thrown around a lot, and everyone's like, if you're still sad after 1 year, right, something's wrong with you. And so that's part of my mission is, right, to delayer these misunderstandings.
Debunk, come on.
Debunk, because that is just not true. There is no timeline, right?
No,
there
everybody's
is
different.
Love, and it's not something to get over, right? And we talk about this in my group, and this is a really good framework for understanding. So, and in the book, My Little Blue House, which we haven't really talked about yet, but
we'll get there.
It's inspired by my work with grieving spouses. And so in the book and in our conversations, we generally shun this language of getting over it, right? And in the book, I say, getting over the best thing and the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Can you imagine? Getting over it is not the goal. Living with it is a goal. But one of the ladies in our group came, it wasn't that long ago, and she said, I do think you can get over it. And we were all kind of, I think, collectively like, oh, what do you mean? And what she meant was, I'm no longer disabled by my grief.
Mm.
I love my husband as much as ever. I don't miss him any less. I am no longer disabled by my grief. I can live a joyful life, a satisfying life, a sustainable life. How powerful is that?
That's a strong woman right there.
Incredible.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so we've gone through minimal, these kind of little stages that we talked about of someone who is preparing perhaps there. But the other part that I think is interesting and tough would be that you don't feel like being around people when you're grieving.
Many
Initially,
times.
right?
Right.
And how is it when in your group that people are able to just reach out and then invite or bring in to let people know that the isolation is more difficult and will be more painful? So I'm hoping that message gets out today too.
Yes.
And so take it from there. I think you probably have something you want to say.
Yes. So, and I actually just asked my group this on Monday, that suffering alone is almost always worse. And the whole group, right, I think it was 38 on Monday, said, yes, it's worse when you're by yourself. And so if you can kind of make yourself go, because part of the continued suffering is not being understood, right? Not being loved where you are, feeling like you have to hide on the underside of the duck, right? Anything that's negative. And you don't want to be a Debbie Downer, and people don't know how to talk to you because they don't know whether to say your loved one's name or not. And so they'll talk around it, or they'll talk about the weather, which you don't care about. And so, and even if you're an introvert or extrovert, right, which this does have some bearing on, and some people know I'm going to have to find a group right away. Some people know, they're invited and they're like, this is a safe place. Okay. And by safe, it means you don't have to explain. You can cry. In fact, I have a sign that I haven't put it out for a while, but they all know about it and I need to put it out again. But like tears are just love in liquid form. Like they don't need to be explained, nor hidden, nor apologized for. Just let them flow.
She's making me cry.
Yes. The invitation is also yours.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so people learn that does feel better when I'm with other people who understand.
Yeah. I mean, even me being pretty extroverted, I would have a really hard time getting to a group.
Right. It isn't, and I can't say that a group is for everyone, but we, as human beings, we need to feel connected.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to go to a group, if you can find one or two people where you can have, and this is something I've learned, you can have a standing date. That's the beautiful thing about Mondays at 11, because when you're already feeling vulnerable, when you're grieving, right, to invite someone to coffee or dinner, it's really hard to do because they might say no. And it might not be because they don't want to, but they're busy. And then it's crushing. You finally got the courage, you finally got the energy, and someone says no. So if you can have even a handful of people and say, hey, can we have a standing lunch on Wednesday? Then the time and date have already been set.
Yeah.
The place, you don't have to think through it every time. And then whoever can come can come. And
so is it mostly the people in the group that now reach out to others, or how do they know about it? How do they get?
Yeah, a lot word of mouth or Mending Hearts Grief Center. I mean, they have a website.
Okay.
Sometimes somebody came by recommendation of their doctor. So it is very word of mouth. And then, the community, like they go to, their different churches. And so, it's interesting how people come.
And
how
they
they
find their
find it.
way.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a lot of beautiful stories from the people you've met through all these past years.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit more about how the book was born. And as you can see, we are live right now, but this will be up on YouTube later. And
Okay.
you can see her book, The Little Blue House.
Yes.
So tell me the beginnings and the origins of how this was inspired and came about.
Okay, this is really exciting. So, the book was published a year ago, December, and I think it was March earlier that year. I met with my group in the morning, and because of recognizing how much more language and understanding we need around grief, right? Because people, if they know anything about grief, only usually know 5 stages of grief, and they think it's a map, and it's not bad, but it's minimally helpful, right? So I'm always trying to think of other images and ways we can understand, what is this like for people? How can we understand our own experience and connect with other people in their experience? Like, that's the goal. And so that morning in my group, I had taken a woven cloth and I had cut it. And I said, when I hear you talk about what this feels like to you, it's like you have a woven garment and every thread that was formerly attached is now seeking its former attachment, and it hurts in every one of those places. But no one can see that.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked them if that resonated with their experience, and they said it did. So later, I'm driving around visiting hospice patients in the afternoon, and I'm driving, and this idea, Little Blue House.
Downloads.
God download. Somebody told me that phrase once, and I wish I could
The
credit
God
them because
download,
the God download. I don't know who that was, but it was a God download. And it was like the Little Blue House, the image came. And then so much of what I've been hearing them say over the last 5-6 years just started flowing about. And so it's written kind of in the form of a children's story. Anyway, so I'm driving. The Little Blue House idea comes. I get my phone. I start voice recording.
Sure.
And probably 80% of the story was written within the hour. Wow. Just flow. And I really feel like God wrote it and I captured it. Like, which is, I write a blog and, every so often, and it's like that. I wait to write until I'm capturing something rather than making it up, That's that. I just wait. And so that's what it was. And then one of our members was volunteering at our hospice office, and I said, I got to read this to you. And I read it, and she's like, you're going to make people cry. And of course, I'm okay with that. So then I read it to my group, and they loved it. They felt, seen and heard. And many of them, especially after they held the book in their hands, realized, hey, I live in a little blue house. Like I can understand my own experience even better um, after reading this story, which is really written about my life in the first place. But we can't
Mm,
usually get far enough away from it to really understand what it's like for us.
right. So the book, in its essence, is life without the loved one.
Yeah, it's
Is
like the lived experience in the little blue house. So the little blue house is the life that you built with your loved one, and then they die, and then it's the space within you that's left behind that
mm,
never goes away. And we in the end, we think that's the goal. We think, oh, we're going to be back like we were before. The goal is to recognize it's not going to go away, and in fact, you don't want it to.
yeah.
It's your life with them. And it's the place where you can meet other people in
Mm,
their little blue house. It's a meeting place. It's a life lived, right? A life shared, a life built. And now it's a meeting place where that life can also continue to live and you can
mm.
meet other people in it. But no expectation that the goal is to shrink it down to nothing or get rid of it.
Right. The way I've always imagined it as a personal experience is, and for people that I've known that have suffered great losses, is that it is a hole that heals but never closes. It's a hole in your heart that heals but never closes. So I think of it as kind of like this, I don't know, like this big old hole in your heart
Yeah.
that when it first happens is quite open wound, bleeding,
Yes.
hemorrhaging, horrible,
Yes.
painful, like a new wound.
Yes.
But then that wound starts to heal up, but it doesn't close.
I think that's very apt.
Yeah, it doesn't actually close. So you learn to live with the hole.
Very right.
But what you've added to my story then would be that space that's left behind goes to be poured out on others.
Yeah, that's a meeting place.
The meeting place. I like that. Maybe that's your next book, The
Maybe.
Meeting Place. But you said maybe there might be a prequel to this one.
A
So I want to hear
prequel.
about that.
Yeah, so I have to mention Colleen Bradfield, who illustrated the book. I was her husband's hospice chaplain also, but I'd been able to accompany her for some years prior to his passing. She's a beautiful artist. And so after I wrote the book, I asked her if she would make a cover for it. And after she read it again, she said, some illustrations would really bring your words to life. So Colleen and her brother-in-law, who both lost their spouses and after some period of caregiving, asked me pretty recently if I would consider writing a prequel to My Little Blue House, which goes into the lived experience of caregiving and what they wish they would have known. And of course, I have a lot of caregiving experience myself after caring for my mom so early on. So it's a subject that's very dear to my heart. But again, drawing on the wisdom of people who have done it, things that they're really glad they did, things that they regret, things that they would do differently, and how we can really empower people with this information.
Right. Which I'm looking forward to in the months ahead. I'll be having a devout caregiver come talk about the nuances of caring for aging parents and stuff too.
Excellent.
So I can see the Lord does this to me sometimes. He gives me a theme on my radio show. So this is what's
Yes.
going on right now.
Yes.
Well, it's quite beautiful. So let's talk about more to our audience right now who maybe is grieving and alone. What would you want to say to them? They could be in Waco, they could be in Palestine, they could be here in Bryan College Station, they could be anywhere.
Yeah.
What would be some of the things you'd want to say to them right now?
I would say that there is hope. You can learn how to live with it. You can recover your joy. You can find people who understand and people to do life with. No one will replace your loved one, and that is not the goal. But they can, and this is one of the joys in my role, is I can learn about them through you, right? And that is the best way to honor people that you love, is to imitate everything you love about them. Bring them in the room as often as you can.
Yeah.
But to find grief in order to heal, it does need to be expressed. If it's keeping you from engaging in the things that you used to enjoy, or if you can't find any joy, right? Grief, which can lead to depression, right? So if you get into a place where you just can't experience joy anymore, you have no motivation. There are things that can help, right? And it's like trying to find the right tool for the right job. You find the right tool for the job, and the job becomes so much easier.
Yeah.
But it does have to be expressed. And if you're not a group person, right? I mean, humans need humans with very few exceptions. So it does take a little risk, take some courage, take some energy. The first time or two you try and break out of your isolation, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's probably going to feel like the wrong thing to do. It is the path to healing, and it's about traveling with people who understand. And so even people who have partnered again, right, have married again, they still they credit the group with doing all the healing that took place that allowed them to love another person.
It's beautiful.
So,
But I would be remiss if I didn't start to ask you how your new master's works into your grief counseling.
Yes.
Do you do one-on-one counseling
Yes.
as well? So tell me how that dovetails.
yeah. So in fact, my group just had to sign a form now because I'm a licensed counselor, whereas before I was just, I was a chaplain. They had to. I'm all professional now, which is a little weird, but so I see people one-on-one for grief. I see a lot with grief, and it's important to note that we don't just grieve life and death, right? We grieve loss of relationship. We grieve losing a functionality due to age or illness.
I would think the loneliness would be the one thing too, which to me, loneliness, while tragic, when you have someone that you've lost, that in the true depths of our soul, it's really a God-sized hole that we have to fill with God during those times.
And we learn so much about ourselves. You lose someone you love, and the two questions that I've learned are the questions of a grieving person are, who am I and what am I supposed to be doing? That it comes down to identity, right? And purpose.
Right.
Those are the questions that come up. And if you aren't I would say a well-formed person, but if you're not a person who, you
thought about these things, right?
Or like I'm a wife and a mom, right? It's easy to throw yourself into being a wife and a mom and not continue to nourish your personhood. Really,
Yeah.
invest in yourself. And so I'm encouraging people, to do that. We're the vessel that God moves through, right? And so we are our own greatest tool, and not greatest like self-promoting, but greatest in that God is entrusting us with a very important work. And back to the loneliness, that's the one thing we can always do something about. We can't stop death. We can't stop aging. But God does give us this power to mitigate loneliness for one another.
Right.
If we are willing to meet each other on the bottom side of the duck, so to speak, like if we are willing to be vulnerable, and we must, because if we are only going to meet people on mountaintops and when the sun is shining, we are missing most of life together.
Wow. But with these last 2.5 minutes that we have, it's gone by so quickly.
So fast.
Yeah, I would. I really feel like I've learned a lot, but at the end of the day, too, that to seek solace in Christ, to really, and where can you find Him most of all? In others, right? So whether it is in your neighbor, whether it is in your church community,
Yes,
that do not isolate yourself. That's the worst thing you can do. Reach out, find someone that you can confide in. Whether it's calling up Heidi.
Yes, Hope Counseling Center.
Hope Counseling Center,
yes.
Whether it's just reaching out to a good friend.
Stephen's
who's
ministers
suffering.
are a great resource in our community. They will come to you 1 hour a week, no charge to you. I mean, this is a highly underutilized.
Okay, and that is based out of St. Thomas Aquinas?
St. Thomas Aquinas Christ Church also has
The Stephen Ministry?
Yep. So
Okay.
there are people who are giving so much of themselves to be trained, to be good listeners, to come non-judgmentally.
Amazing.
So really, yes, and that's in your own home. So, and it's men
Wow.
for men and women for women. So no.
And this is not just grief counseling, though, is
No.
it? It's like
Anybody
just
going through-
difficult times in
Anybody who
general.
wants to be accompanied.
Right. Okay. Wow. Well, so here with this last minute and a half, How would you like to sum things up, Miss Heidi?
I would like to share, I think, the most profoundly impactful way of understanding grief before we close, which is, we hear about the stages and we hear, but the thing that has been most helpful for people, and I can't draw it for you now, but it's called the dual process model. When you're thinking about what is healthy grief, am I grieving in a healthy way or not? The dual process model suggests that there are two parts to grieving: loss-oriented processes and restoration-oriented processes. So we're going to have to look back, remember, feel the pain of loss. That is going to have to be part of it, and we have to feel it to heal it. We do.
Yes, go through it.
But we also have to be willing to look forward and see how can we bring our person and our love forward? How can we one of my hospice patients said the most beautiful thing as told by her son before he died, and said, life is for the living, so live it.
Yes.
And so we have to be willing to live. And so, but also figure out how this pain and joy, right? Death and life, they can go together.
And you know what? Oh, that just reminds me of the Passion. Here we are in the Lenten season, and I constantly remind myself that we can't get to Easter Sunday without the Passion. And I also am reminded of Our Lady is under the mantle of the Sorrowful Mother, that how much she embraced all of the sorrow, but she had perfect trust in God. So I really want to encourage our listeners to increase that trust in God. I need to every day to say, Jesus, I trust in you. Please, Lord, increase my trust. So I just pray, brothers and sisters, if you're out there today, increase your trust in the Lord. Reach out. You're not alone. We are a community of believers sent to love and help one another. Heidi, my gosh, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you.
We'll have to do this again sometime.
Would love to.
All right. Well, thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining us. Until next time, go and love your neighbor.
Amen.